But it's such an honor to be up here. I was just looking at all the speakers who are speaking today, and a few months ago when Jay invited, and I almost got a little overwhelmed. I don't have a formal design degree or formal design education, and I almost went to the LinkedIn design team, and I told Iqbal, why don't you go? Because I don't know if I can speak intelligently at this conference. And then I saw the actual schedule lineup, and I was slotted right after Koh, and that got me even more nervous. It's a hard act to follow. We all have spent so much time reading his blog and learned so much from the work he's done with New York Times and now with Adobe. So it's really an honor to be up here. And I thought I'm going to, if you can maybe switch. OK. All right. So that is slide number 1 for me. All right. So working. Anybody guess where this is? Say again? Riverfront. Where? Do you know which city? Ahmedabad. Yeah. So I grew up in Ahmedabad, and this is the new Sabarmati riverfront. When I was growing up in Ahmedabad, Sabarmati was a river that didn't have any water, and we would never go anywhere close to that. It's been completely redesigned into this amazing riverfront that I think is among the best drives from the airport to the city now. And I live not too far from this riverfront now. Also went to, when I was growing up, this was my high school. I went to St. Xavier's Loyola Hall, and I have very fond memories growing up. Pretty much went from kindergarten all the way to 12th grade in this school. There was a principal called Father Charlie, who was just an amazing influence in my life. He used to run these leadership camps when we were really young, and I think that played a huge role in terms of who I am today. But one of the fondest memories of this school was that from 1st to 7th grade, 2 out of our 9 subjects that we used to take was arts and craft. And as I was starting to think about this talk, I thought about those days and thought about, it was such an amazing time because we were, I was drawing, I was doing all these different crafts, and I was really interested in all the stuff that we were doing back when we were young kids. And I think for me, like, a huge influence was my mom, because my mom was, she's extremely creative. She's always doing craft at home. She paints, so there's a lot of paintings in our house. My dad's here, he's in textiles, and so I remember, I would sit with my mom in a rickshaw, and we would go to the old city, and we would like go to textile shops, and we would pick linens, and we would pick cloth, and we would come back, and we would design our own clothes. And it was such a creative time growing up because, I was doing all these things, I was making all of that stuff. And in some ways, I felt like just being around my mom, I think, rubbed off of me. It kind of gave me a lot of those creative genes, or creative kind of, and in some ways, like, as I entered high school, not because of the pressure of my parents, but because of just people around me in terms of what they were doing, it really boiled down to these 3 things that people were doing growing up in India. You either go to engineering, you become a doctor, or you go to, maybe do your family business. I think at least growing up, taking on liberal arts meant that you flunked all your classes. And so, I was really good in math and physics, and so I thought like maybe engineering is my path. And so I took a flight from India all the way to Indiana and went to Purdue University to study electrical engineering. And this is the electrical and computer engineering building in the engineering mall. It was freezing temperatures pretty much like half the year in Indiana. And so I spent a lot of time in labs like this, where basically went to the other extreme. I was just solving like analytical, quantitative problems. I was doing a lot of math, solving them theoretically in classes with pen and paper, and then go to these labs and like, make sure those things actually work the way they're supposed to. And I was just thinking about like my high school and my undergraduate degree, and I thought about, the most creative work that I did in college was this research paper that I wrote. And this was a paper that I wrote 10 years ago. And so I thought, like, maybe I should read it again. So this week, I like, downloaded it, read it again, and I realized I couldn't understand a single full sentence in this paper. I don't even know what collaborative beamforming was, and here I was writing this paper. Interestingly, this paper ended up being, it's actually cited by a lot of different papers now, and it's become an important piece of work that IEEE is now charging $30 to download this paper. I wish I had saved that PDF from when we actually wrote this. It was crazy. So anyways, as luck would have had it, this was 2007, and 2007 was kind of the peak of a lot of people going from India and peak of a lot of jobs. And it turns out that as soon as I graduated, I applied for my H-1B visa, which a lot of us do, hoping to stay on and actually work in the US. And that year ended up being a oversubscribed year. So I think there were 3 times as many people who had applied on day one as opposed to the number of visas they were actually going to give out. And fortunately for me, I did not make the lottery. I didn't get my visa. And so I had to fall back to my plan B. And my plan B was to actually go and pursue a master's program. And I applied to a few schools as a backup, and fortunately had gotten into Stanford in their electrical engineering program. And so what felt normal was that I'd done my undergrad in electrical engineering, so I just kind of continue on doing that in Stanford as well. And so, as expected, the first course that I signed up for in 2008 was this course by Andrew Ng on machine learning. It felt like the right thing to do. I'd done so much math, so much signal processing. This felt like maybe the right next kind of course to take. And then, like literally on day one of Stanford, as I was walking around the campus, seeing this beautiful architecture, meeting all these different students, breathing the California air, I bumped into a fellow named Joel Saller, who was actually part of the teaching staff at the design school, which is also known as the D School. And he said, it's great that you're taking this like AI machine learning course, but if you get a chance, also take this boot camp course in design thinking that is being offered at the D School. I'm teaching it along with other people. Why don't you just come and take that? And so I said, it's worth at least taking a look. So I went to the D School, and it was like, and I still remember that day. It felt like I was in a candy store. Away from all these labs where we're just kind of crunching things on the computer, here there's this, there was literally no like classroom. Everything, all the furniture was on wheels. People were just moving stuff around. There were Post-its, there were whiteboards. People were sitting out in the sun discussing design problems. And I think most importantly, like everybody looked so happy. They were just like having so much fun building these things and like designing all these things. And I was like, wow, this sounds like a really fun place to be. Like I gotta sign up for this class. So I signed up for the design thinking bootcamp in this course, and there was this board. It's like nothing is a mistake. There's no win, no fail. There's only make. And I felt like, all right, this feels like a really like such a different but exciting place to be. So anyways, the first day of class, I get to the design thinking bootcamp. I'm actually walking away from Andrew Ng's class where we were learning about supervised, unsupervised learning, and I get to the class, and the design brief that we got on day one was that all of us were going to spend the next week redesigning how people eat ramen noodles. And I was like, where the hell am I? Like, this must be the wrong place. Maybe I should just go back to the electrical engineering building. But I was like, well, let me at least give it another week. Let's see like this process. Let's figure out if this is for me. If not, I can always go back to my computer science and statistic courses. So I was like, let's run with this. So we then ended up going to, as part of the brief, we were just going to go out and actually meet people who were eating ramen noodles. And for me, it was like, I grew up eating Maggi noodles here, and I thought you didn't have to do anything to change that. It was amazing. But we were asked to just go out and actually see people interacting or eating ramen noodles. And so we went to this restaurant in Mountain we call Maruichi, and we were basically, I was sitting in this restaurant just staring at people eating ramen noodles. That probably freaked them out. And then, so here we were basically just trying to see, and understand how people eat ramen noodles. And after this, we actually went to the Nijiya market, which is like a Japanese store. And then we basically asked random people as they were buying ramen noodles. I think I'm just going to drop this clicker, and I'm just going to say this so that it just moves. So there was all these ramen in the store, and people were buying different things. And I think just in a few hours, like 4 to 6 hours, I just realized that there was so much to ramen noodles. I think different people have all these different ways that they eat. Some people eat it as a snack. Some people eat it as a really fancy meal. Some people like long noodles. Some people like short noodles. Some people like thick noodles. Some people like thin noodles. Some people like it spicy. Some people like it mild. Some people like it with a lot of soup. Some people like it without that. Some people eat it on the go. And some people just sit and eat. And this was just such a variety of different things. And I think if you talk to people, they would tell you all the different ways you could actually be improving that experience. And to me, it was such an, I didn't realize that you could actually improve just the idea of eating ramen, and they did that. And so when I, when I thought about starting companies, if you just go to the next slide, the idea that I thought before this experience was all about you just think of an idea, you just kind of make it, and then you test it, and it would always start with wouldn't it be nice if we built something like that? And one of the things that the design team design school really taught me was this process, and in the step one was empathize, which was to actually spend time with people out there and really understand how they live their lives and understand the problems they have that you actually solve. And this is something that stuck with me. So if you, the first thing I want to talk about as I regained creativity was this idea of human-centered approach, which is really kind of going out there and empathizing with your users before you actually build anything, before you decide to do solve any problem, actually go out there and figure out what those are. And so the next project that we did was we actually solved, we actually worked on a process of changing how elections could be run. We worked on a project where, how can we improve the rewards that people get on their credit cards. And then the next quarter, I took this course where we were redesigning how, basically designing products for the developing world. And one of the projects that I was given as part of the team was to think about how do we improve nutrition in a country like Rwanda. Now, instead of actually sitting in Palo Alto or Stanford thinking about how we can make a difference in Rwanda, which is probably what I would have done, what we did in this case was we actually went there. And we met all of these farmers. We spent 10 days over spring break meeting all these folks. And one of the insights that we got was that literally most of the countryside were all producing this crop called cassava, which is kind of like a potato. And they would produce it in their backyards, and then they would go to this local miller where they would take the cassava and they would ground it into flour. And that was pretty much a lot of people there were doing. And so what we built when we came back was a small instrument that would connect to this mill, so that as the cassava is getting ground into flour, there would be micronutrients added to it. Something that we would have never thought of, something that we would have never imagined it to be a solution to the idea if we hadn't spent those 2 weeks in Rwanda talking to a lot of people and really, truly understanding their lives. And I think if I kind of fast forward to the last quarter at Stanford, the whole idea of the Pulse News app also was born out of just, actually Ankit and I spent a lot of time in this cafe, which is on the University Avenue, and we would just see a lot of people reading news around us. And one of the things we realized was that more and more people were moving away from newspapers. This is back in 2009, 2010. and increasingly reading news on their mobile devices. iPad had not launched yet, but I think more and more that was happening. And so the second thing I want to talk about after you really build that empathy is this idea of really having a bias towards action. If I think about my life pre-Stanford, I would have a lot of ideas in my head, but I would do nothing about it. There were ideas that I would just keep in my brain for like 6, 12, 24 months, and they would just kind of get stale because I was not doing anything about it. And one of the things that Stanford changed, the D School particularly changed, was that every time I would have an idea now, I would do something about it. I would sketch it out, I would make a cardboard prototype, I would body storm it just to kind of feel the experience that we were trying to change. And just having this bias towards actions made a huge difference in the last decade in my life. This Dilbert comic actually, kind of summarizes kind of how I was doing it before D School, which was just in my head. I was kind of going through the motions, but I was doing nothing tangible to show to people, what we're building. And so going back to the Pulse example, Pulse was actually built in a Stanford class. It was built in a course called Launchpad. Here are the two professors. Michael Deering was, a professor. He's an investor for Harrison Metal, and then there was Perry Kleban, who was an operator, CEO of a company called Timbuktu. These guys were professors of the class, and Erica was our TA. And the first thing they asked us to do in this class was we were all asked to sign a piece of paper which said that if we were not publicly launching our product in the 11 weeks of this class, we would fail this course. And I'm so glad he asked us to do that, because if he hadn't asked us to do that, Pulse would have never been out in the App Store, would have never been a company. I would have, again, thought about this in my mind, about how we can improve news consumption and news on mobile devices. I would have never launched. So because we have this almost like external pressure to graduate, to actually pass this class, Ankit and I actually spent a lot of time in this cafe because we didn't have an office. And so Ankit would basically, be in the cafe coding up the app while I was the designer trying to figure out, how we, what kind of interactions we're putting, what kind of visuals we're putting. So as he would code up the app, I would take the iPad, which had just launched, to all the random cafe goers and ask them for feedback. Is this something that you would use? Is this something you would pay for? It's quite a fun process. In 6 weeks, we went from an idea to actually launching this app on the App Store, something we wouldn't have done if we didn't have that external pressure. And what I'm going to show you now is literally the first version of the Pulse app. But the only way I'm going to show it to you is if you're not going to laugh at my visual design skills. Here's an electrical engineer with no design background. I didn't even know what sans serif meant back then. And we built this news app, and I was the chief designer of this app. So we're just gonna run this video of the app. So we built this app which was extremely visual. That was one of the things that people really complained about, was everything was so text heavy back in 2010. And we built this app so that you can literally see visually what's happening in the world. We also had this 2-axis design that people really liked. This is again this was the first version, so we were kind of trying to play around with a few different things we could really put on. You can see how Facebook share looked like in 2010. We had a lot of fun really building this, and the idea was to we made this video because it's a way for us to kind of really tell our story about this app. I remember putting it in a lot of design blogs, I think back then it was like Core 77 and Notcard and all of these things, just to see what designers would actually say. And I think people liked the interaction design, but they hated the visual design of this app. And so I'll share some of the examples that we changed eventually. But I think we can kind of go to the next slide. Once we put this out in the App Store, I didn't know what to expect. I thought this was something that a few people in Stanford would play around with. Maybe a few people who just bought the iPad would try. In about 3 weeks, we were selling this app for $4, and it became the top paid app in the entire App Store. And not for the news category. This became the top paid app in the entire App Store for a couple of weeks. In fact, I remember this, this was a week before I graduated. I was sitting in my dorm looking, basically I tuned into the Worldwide Developer Conference in 2010. And here was, it's before Steve Jobs talked about the new iPhone 4. He said, let me show you a few iPad apps that have just launched. And obviously, Apple didn't tell us this was happening. So as I was watching this video, here's the first app he talks about. He says, let me show you a few apps. And he basically talks about Pulse. And I literally fell off my chair. And then a few months later, we also received the Design Award by Apple. They give out about 10 every year. So what a crazy 10-week run. Here was an electrical engineer and a computer science major getting together to build a news app. We had no design experience before. And here we were, talked about by the Steve Jobs and received an Apple Design Award a few months later. And I think none of this would have happened if we hadn't launched this app. Like, I think if it would have just stayed in my mind, it would have never seen the light of day. And so having this bias towards action, actually putting things out there, improving it, is something that I think really brought my creativity back, because it really pushed me to just get feedback and improve things and not worry about making things perfect. Now, one of the challenges of having a bias for action, I'll give you another Dilbert strip here, is that you actually end up making a bunch of mistakes. And I think you just have to kind of play around and be OK with that and improve it. So I'm going to give you 3 examples of things we got wrong, all in the visual design sense. So the first one was, if you just can go to the next slide, was this splash screen. I don't know what the hell I was thinking then, but this kind of visual in the back had nothing to do with news. It had nothing to do with the word Pulse. It had nothing to do with anything. I don't even know where I got this image from. I think it was probably like my desktop wallpaper, and I thought it would look nice on the app. And so when you click on the Pulse app, where you would see this really nasty-looking splash screen before you would actually see the app. So when we got a real designer in the team, we got rid of this. We made it just plain gray so that people can just jump into the content. The next thing was, I remember, and Koi is going to love this, is because I thought this would be amazing. Was we would take the app and we would, when you first time you actually load the app, we would put this overlay on top of it, and we would tell you how the app works. And so we thought we would sketch it out and we'd put this on top of it. And it's a funny story, but if you go to the next slide, Koi wrote a post about this, and he used this as an example of unnecessary explanation. And I read this post, and I was like, okay, we gotta get rid of that stuff now. And the last one, this was probably the funniest one. If you go to the next slide, I don't know why, but I thought the L in the Pulse should be taller than a normal L. I don't know. I thought it would be slightly edgy, maybe people would like it. So a few months later, when we had Purin was our designer. He had been at IDEO for a while, and he came in and he's like, why did you, if you just go back to the Pulse icon, he's like, why did you make this L tall? I was like, I don't know, I thought it would be kind of interesting, people would remember it. And he's like, well, if you just keep going, just go back, from far, if you look at it, it looks like a middle finger. I don't know if you want your users to really think about it as that. And so he cut the L off and made it a proper L. But anyways, you make these mistakes, but the point is that, the fact that it was out there and we improved it, and over the course of 3 years, we actually got 30 million users, and it was finally acquired by LinkedIn, which is where I'm at today. But all of this journey wouldn't have been possible, A, if we hadn't spent time with our users and understand kind of what the problems they had, and B, if we hadn't built something and push it out there, and be open to feedback and be open to changes. Eventually, Pulse became an app that was actually known for its design, but the first version, as I just seen, it wasn't there. And so the last thing I want to talk about is, if you can go to the next slide, is this idea that Koi kind of talked about as well, is this idea of the world we live in about radical collaboration. And this is one of the things that in design school we had, was that they almost for every project that we had, they forced us to work with people who were not in the same stream. So I never worked with other electrical engineers. So if you go to the next slide, I was always paired with people. So if I was representing technology, I was paired with people who were from the business school, so that they could be really thinking about viability of this product going out. We were always paired with people who had some design bent or had done design education. But not only that, we were sometimes, I remember doing a project where my co-partners were people from the journalism school, people from education, and we all came together with this idea that we can all be creative. We all have ideas of how we can solve problems in the world. And so this idea that designer is the only person thinking about design was basically thrown out the window. Like, I think they may be, you guys may be the folks who really make sure that eventually you're the owner of building usable and products that actually look great. But ideas can actually come from literally everyone. Like the Pulse idea came from literally an geeky electrical engineer and a even more geekier computer scientist. And we solved a problem that a lot of people had. And so if you just go to the next slide, this is just a blast from the past. This is 2008. We were working on a project with Visa, and Jeremy was someone from the business school, and Christina was out of the photo. She's from the management sciences school. And here's the photo from very recently from the LinkedIn India team. We went on this user research in Lucknow, and instead of just sending the user researcher to Lucknow, one of the things we now do at LinkedIn India is we actually send people, product managers go, designers go, there's product operations folks go, business development folks go. We're all in this research session learning about our users, because I really feel like every function in the company having this empathy for users is really going to have a huge impact in the way we're actually shipping products. In fact, just about last year, I remember there was an engineering manager who sat down with 6 college students in Nasik, and he was going to basically show the onboarding process of LinkedIn to these 6 college students. And he was sitting in this room in Nasik, and he basically got there and he showed this. He was going to go through the process, and it turns out our onboarding, the LinkedIn onboarding, didn't load for him. He came back to the office and he basically said, I know we got to fix the design and all of this stuff, but our thing needs to load first. And that was the inspiration for LinkedIn Lite that was launched just last year, which was basically, we basically brought down the load speeds by 80%. And now literally every page on LinkedIn.com, if you go on your mobile browser, now loads under 5 seconds. Even if you're on a 2G network, it will load under 5 seconds. And I think all of this wouldn't have happened if that engineer didn't feel like the empathy, the need to really fix this. And so the last slide I'll end up with is all the learnings I had at the design thinking boot camp in Stanford. And just a few weeks ago at LinkedIn India, we basically, one of the in days, I said, if anybody wants to learn design thinking, I'll try to, basically share some of the stuff we've learned in about 90 minutes. And so about 60 people from all different functions signed up, including people from sales signed up. And we all, we got paired, they got paired in 2 pairs, and essentially they each made a wallet, like a physical wallet for the other person after learning what his or her requirements were. And then, I think all these 3 things really helped me regain my creativity. And the reason I call it, regaining it is because I actually think that I was born fairly creative. Like, I really enjoyed doing things that were really creative, but along the way, school got in the way and college got in the way, and I lost that creativity. And I'm so thankful, especially to Stanford and the D School, for helping me regain this creativity. And so if you just go to the last slide, David Kelly and Tom Kelly, the 2 brothers, they started the design from IDEO. They were also the people behind the D School. They were instrumental in putting that together. And they recently wrote a book called Creative Confidence. And they talk about this great example, which I want to leave you with, is that when you were all 4 years old, if somebody told you to draw, you would be the most excited kid in the house. You would literally draw anywhere. You would take crayons and maybe even draw on the walls of your house. And suddenly, when you became 24, if somebody asked you to draw, you would just freeze and be like, I don't want to do that. And so what happened? Where did we lose all of that creative freedom that we had? And so that's my story as well. I feel a lot more creatively confident today as I did maybe 10 years ago, sitting in Purdue. And so that's the maybe the message I'll leave you guys with is think about not just your own creative confidence, but also the folks around you, and think about how you can develop their confidence in being creative. So thank you.